In this exercise, I'm going to create the pattern and make the garment up for this little top, which is on page 86 of the Winifred Aldridge metric patterning book. On this garment, you've got a yoke, a very complicated yoke with lots of scallops and things. And you've got various panels as well. The silhouette in this garment is going to be very straight. It's not going to be fitted in at the waist. It's just going to lie straight from the bust line. And there's going to be no side seam in it. And on this pattern, I'm going to move the big bust dart and the shoulder dart into the seams. Okay, the very first thing we do is draw this vertical line on your piece of spot and cross paper. Now that's going to be the chest line on these garments. So I now take my bodice block and I'm placing the chest line on the vertical line and I'm drawing around it. I'm using my little blue bags of sand. So what I'm doing here, I'm drawing around the neckline, down the centre front and across the bottom here. Now I'm using a big thick red felt tip pen. I don't want you to use that at all. I want you to use a pencil. So again, I'm marking where the bust point is. I'm taking that off and there I've got my pattern marked on. I'm taking my back, laying on the chest line again. Make sure they're side by side. Here at the underarm, drawing around the centre, back, shoulder, marking where the dart is, because these darts are going to be placed into seams. So on this particular style, we're not going to have any darts. All the suppression in the garment will be done through the seams. If I take that off, there I've got my my front and back bodice marked on the paper. Now, we are now going to draw these lines here on the actual patterns. We're going to transfer the lines on this picture here through onto the patterns. Now, don't forget to mark your centre front and centre back. Now, I want you to mark in your bust dart and your shoulder dart here in the back. Now, on this particular garment, it is not going to be fitted at the side seam. It's going to be completely straight down from the bust line here, the chest line. So what I want you to do, first of all, is draw a straight line on your spot and cross paper across the bottom, like that. Can you see? And the side seam line is going to be here in the middle here. So that's the side seams of your bodice block in the red. But this is going to be a new side seam line. It's going to be straight. We're not going to be suppressing this garment at the waist. It's going to just drop down as a straight box-like silhouette from the chest line. So we've now got to draw in the lines, but the key thing here is that these lines must go through the bottom of that dart. So I'm doing a nice, beautiful little curve here, following the shapes that's on the picture. Now, on this picture, it says this next line I'm going to draw should be curved. Now, I'm drawing it straight because if you don't draw it straight, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to sew. So I'm drawing in the next lines. And we're not going to suppress this garment with this dart at the bottom. And here I'm drawing in the lines on the back. And I'm doing the curved line here for the yoke. Okay, can you see that okay? I think you can. So I'm just using flat bit on my pattern master, but it's vital that it goes through the end of that dart. So here's the lines drawn in. Again, if we look at the book, here we can see on the back, there's the yoke line, there's the yoke line there, there's your extra panel here on the back. On the front, here is your yoke, and here is the yoke, and again here is this extra section here, which is an extra bit that we're going to cut out and add a seam to. So now what we've got to do is cut these bits out, cut these, the back and the front out. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm just cutting up the centre front here at the moment. Get rid of all the scrap paper. I'm cutting across the blue line at the bottom because it's going to be a little short box type silhouette. And I'm cutting out. Cutting around roughly to get rid of all the excess paper, and then we can get started making the pattern. Okay. Cut around the armhole here. Now, on this garment, there is not going to be a side seam. All of this section here is going to be what we refer to as a side body. So first thing I'm doing here is cutting out this section here along the blue line. So that's going to be my side body. There's not going to be a side seam at all on this garment. So here I've got my side body. Pattern already produced, except it needs seam allowance. Got to move it out of the way. I'm going to cut along the blue line and create the second pattern. Now, there's my second pattern. Okay. Right. Now, remember what I said? We're not going to have any darts in this. So what I'm going to do, we're going to create the suppression and shape that's required for the bust through seams. So So what I'm doing is I'm cutting out the big dart here. Okay, cutting that out, getting rid of that, and I am going to close it over. So I'm closing the dart over, and I'm just taping it. I'm closing over the dart and taping it closed. Okay, so there's my first set of patterns made. Move those out of the way and now deal with the back. Cutting around the line for the yoke. There's my back pattern, and now I'm going to remove the little dart. I'm cutting it out the same way as you've been doing in dart manipulation, and I'm closing it over. Sticking it together. So let's just lay the patterns out as if we're going to, and there we go. So move out my sellotape out of the way, and here we've got all our pieces. Now, do you remember when we were doing dart manipulation? Just let me move that over a little bit so you can all see it. By moving the dart into another position, it changed shapes. Well, here we're moving the dart as such, but we're not going to be sewing a dart. We're going to be suppressing the garment through the seams here on the back, and here on the front. I say we're not going to be sewing a dart, but we're suppressing it through this seam. So the next thing we've got to do now is take these patterns, draw around them again, and add on seams. Now, we want to create a full front here for the yoke, here, and for the front, the lower front. So what I'm going to take now is take a piece of paper, fold it over, on the spot and cross lines, and I'm going to take my front yoke. Here you can see I've got the dart closed. Draw around it, lay it down here, draw around it, front edge goes to the folded edge of the paper. Draw around it. And then I want you to mark a centimetre seam around it. Now I've already done that and I've cut it out, and I want you to do exactly the same with the lower front as well. Place that little pattern piece on the folded edge of the paper, draw around it and add a centimetre seam. Now I've already added the seams onto this and cut it out. So here on the front, look, put that front yoke to the folded edge of the paper. I have added on a centimetre seam, cut it out, and there I've now got my full front. The lower section of the front, I've put the lower section to the folded edge of the paper, I've drawn around it and added a centimetre seam, and now I've got the full front for this bodice shape. Here we go. Now I want you to do exactly the same for the other ones, the back, but remember the back and the side body. thrown around the piece here. I've just created and I've added on seam allowances. On the back, let me just show you here. The back has got a fastening down it, it's got a seam, so it's not going to be cut on the fold. So I've taken my lower back section, I've drawn 1 centimetre around, with the exception on the centre back, I've added 2 centimetres, and exactly the same for the yoke. Again, centimetre all around, with the exception on the centre back, I've added 2 centimetres because we could be putting a zip or something in there. So let's look at the patterns and let's label them. Here we go. There's the back patterns. As you know, we label patterns with everyone has got a grain line. We've got the grain line here in the centre back. We've got the yoke, the back yoke, and we need a left and right, so we cut 1 pair, and we know everything's size 12. And in this lower back, we know we need a left and a right, so we're going to cut 1 pair. On the side body, we need a left and a right of that as well, so we cut 1 pair. And then on the front patterns, let me move these out of the way, you can see that they're cut on the, move them out of the way, they're cut on the fold look, so we get the 1 big pattern, so we cut 1 of those. And on the lower section of the front, we get 1 big pattern, so we cut 1 of those. So I want you to label the pattern, and now I'm going to sew the garment up. We cut it in calico and sew it up. Right, I've now got all my patterns. They've got the seams on, they're labelled, and they have got, they're all cut out. I'm going to cut this out in calico. So I've got a piece of calico here, and I'm folding the fabric over selvage to selvage. You know what, the calico looks really wrinkly, so it's absolutely vital that you iron it. I don't want to see anybody using anything with wrinkles. So iron your calico, make it nice and straight. Okay. So I've got my fabric, I've laid it over, folded over, selvage to selvage, and here is the folded edge. So I'm now going to lay my pieces on, centre front to the fabric fold. There we go, this piece of calico is just going to be big enough and no more to cut this out. Gosh, it's going to be very tight, but we're going to get it in. Putting the folded edge, centre front here to the folded edge. We don't want the back on the folded edge. Gosh, it's very tight, I might have to. Okay, get it all in. Oh, I'm not going to have enough calico, I don't think, on this place. I'm just going to cut up one. You need to cut out all the pieces. So what I need you to do, lay the pieces up, pin them on, as you know how to pin on. Pin them onto the calico. Loads of pins in to keep the pattern line flat on the material. If you don't have calico, just something else like, you know, calico type fabric, like an old sheet or something like that. So pin them on, all the pieces, and cut them out. Now you know how to do that. So I've got all my pieces already cut for this. So I'm going to now start making it up. Right, the first seam I'm going to sew is, I'm going to sew the yoke onto the lower section of the front here. So it's right sides to right sides, and I'm just pinning it. Okay, now this can be a little bit tricky. I'm laying seam allowance on top of seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew in to where that seam allowance stops at the corner. Then I'm going to, on the top ply, I'm going to cut in to the seam allowance, and that will allow me to now take and turn the material and carry on sewing. Now I've put little balance notches on this to help me with the sewing process. So whenever I'm sewing, I put my pins at right angles to the cloth. So what I'm doing is, and I put balance notches as per I described in a previous video to you how they help with the sewing process. So I'm putting my pins in here at right angles. So it's matching up nicely here, beautifully in fact. It's going to be quite difficult to sew this. So remember, you've put a centimetre seam allowance on your pattern, and you must sew with a centimetre seam allowance on this on the calico. Okay, so basically I'm going to sew around that, same to the other side. Again, I'm matching notches up, balance notches that I put in here. Remember, my notches go at right angles, and again I'm matching up my balance notches. Okay, a bit of fullness there. Coming up here, and you'll think it doesn't fit, but what you're doing is you're cutting in at a 45-degree angle to that square, and that will allow you to take and turn around the corner, and that's what we're doing. Okay, I'm just going to sew it now. Now I've sewn the seam, as you can see here. Now I'm going to press this seam up. But what I want you to do is, because we're sewing around in a curve, I want you to cut in little snips like that, all the way around the curved bits on this, and that will allow you to press the seams up. So I'm cutting around all, so I've got lots of little snips in here. Okay, so I've got lots of little snips, can you see? So now I'm going to press the seam up. So I now have pressed the seams up on this bodice, and I've given it a row of top stitching so we can actually physically see the outline of the yoke on the calico. I'm now going to sew on the side seams, side bodies. Then I'm going to join the yoke, join the yokes to the back. Then I'm going to join the back onto the side body, and the next time you see this, it will be made up and it will be on the mannequin. Right, here you can see the finished bodice. What I've done, I say I've actually top stitched around each one of the seams to show up the shapes and the shapes of the pattern pieces on this toile. I pressed all the seams to one side with the exception of the shoulder seam, which I opened as an open seam. So here you can see we've got lots of shaping around there's no dart, no shaping caused by darts. All the shaping in this little bodice is actually created through this seam here. Okay, it's quite loose. Okay, it's not fitted to the waist as the standard block is. And here you can see we've got a side body. There's no seam because we've attached the two side seams together and created something called a side body. And if I go around the back here, you can see that I don't have the ugly little dart on the shoulder seam. I've created shape here within the seam of the yoke. And I've got another lovely seam panel detail here on the back. I have what I call stay stitched around the armhole, stitching with my lock stitch 1 centimetre in to prevent the armhole from stretching, just in case I want to sew a sleeve into this armhole at a later date. I've also stay stitched around the neckline just in case I want to add a collar, but I've had to snip in here to the because I've had a centimetre seam onto the neckline. I've had to snip in little snips around the neckline to allow it to fit onto the mannequin nicely. So that is the bodice. As you can see, it's quite attractive, and there you go. Enjoy making the pattern for it and making it up if you decide to make it up in full scale as one of your exercises.